Everyone thinks they know this story. A weak boy defeats a giant. But that's not what happened. David was not weaker, and this was not a miracle. It was something far more unsettling, because the most famous underdog story in history may not be an underdog story at all. Imagine this, two armies facing each other, and instead of fighting, they stop. Two men will decide the outcome of the battle, and what happens next will become more than a battle. It will become an image. I'm Alex, and this is The Naked History.
Let's start with the reality behind the story. This is not just a duel, it's a war. On one side, the Philistines, a dominant military power controlling the coastal plains, organized armies, superior metallurgy, iron weapons. On the other, Israel, still fragmented, tribal, less equipped, less structured. The balance is not equal. And then, the war pauses.
Choose a man and let him come down to me. First book of Samuel 17:8.
One man against another. Winner takes everything. This idea feels familiar. In the Iliad, Hector faces a giant warrior named Ereuthalion, a duel meant to resolve conflict without destroying armies. In modern retellings like Troy, we remember a lone Achilles facing a towering opponent, a giant, a challenger, a moment that decides everything. Because humans don't just fight wars, they simplify them, they compress them, they turn them into symbols. But here's the question: if the war is reduced to one man, then everything depends on who that man is. And David wasn't supposed to be that man. David shouldn't even be on that battlefield, because long before Goliath, his story had already begun.
The Lord has sought out a man after his own heart. First book of Samuel 13:14.
In Bethlehem, the prophet Samuel anoints him, a future king, hidden in plain sight. And then something unexpected happens. David enters the court of King Saul, not as a warrior, as a musician, playing the harp, calming a troubled king. He moves between two worlds, the fields, where he is just a shepherd, and the court, where power is decided. Unknown to most, but already close to the center of power. History has seen this pattern before. When Julius Caesar adopts Augustus in 44 BC, Rome is collapsing. Civil war, instability, uncertainty define the moment. Octavian is young, unknown, politically fragile, but adoption gives him something decisive: legitimacy. Before armies, before victories, before control. Years later, he becomes Augustus and transforms Rome into an empire, because sometimes power begins before it is visible. So when David walks onto that battlefield, he's not just a shepherd, he's already something else. The real question is, who is about to misjudge him and pay the price? This is the moment everyone remembers, but almost no one sees it clearly.
David put his hand in his bag and took out a stone. First book of Samuel 17:49.
No clash of swords, no long duel, just distance, a movement, a release, and then the giant falls. Moments like this don't stay as they are, they transform. At the Battle of Marathon near Athens in 490 before Christ, a Greek force of around 10,000 men faces a Persian army estimated at over 100,000, not even counting the fleet behind them. The imbalance is massive, nearly 1-10, and yet the Greeks attack first, break the lines, and win. But what survives is not the detail. It's the image, the small, defeating, the overwhelming. Over time, complexity disappears, replaced by a story simple enough to remember, because what we remember is the image. But what if we've misunderstood David's battle? Then maybe this wasn't a miracle at all, but something deeper. No, this was not a miracle. It was a mismatch.
I come against you in the name of the Lord. First book of Samuel 17:45.
That's the story. But the mechanics are different. Goliath is built for close combat, heavy armor, limited mobility. David never engages directly. He keeps distance, moves faster, strikes first. A sling in trained hands is not primitive. It's precise, fast, deadly. History repeats this pattern. In the Vietnam War, the United States deploys overwhelming military power in Southeast Asia. Advanced technology, Massive resources, strategic superiority, but the war doesn't follow expected rules. Guerrilla tactics, terrain knowledge and mobility redefine the battlefield. The weaker side avoids direct confrontation and controls engagement. Strength becomes difficult to apply. Power becomes misaligned with reality. Because, when the rules change, power doesn't disappear. It becomes irrelevant. So maybe David didn't win because he was braver, but because he was able to approach the problem differently. And maybe, that's exactly why this story survived. Because, what if the story of David and Goliath is not just a battle? What if it's an image? An image of something we all face. A challenge that feels overwhelming. A situation that looks impossible. The giant is not just power, it's doubt, it's fear, it's the story people tell you about what cannot be done. And David doesn't defeat it with force. He defeats it by changing the rules, by refusing the fight that is expected. And if that's true, then the real question is not how David won, but what that victory would change next. Goliath falls, but that's not the real turning point. Listen to what happens next.
All Israel and Judah loved David. First book of Samuel 18:16.
This is not a report, it's a shift, a change in how people see the world. David is no longer just a fighter, he becomes visible, recognized, celebrated, and that changes everything, because some victories don't just solve a problem, they create a new reality. History knows these moments. At the Battle of Saratoga, in October 1777, British General Burgoyne surrenders in New York. Until then, the American cause is uncertain, fragile, divided. After Saratoga, everything changes. France recognizes the Americans and enters the war. A rebellion becomes credible, a local victory becomes legitimacy, and from that moment, the stakes rise. Because once you prove something is possible, people expect more. That's what happens here. David doesn't just defeat a giant, he defeats what the giant represents. An overwhelming problem, a limit, a belief about what cannot be done. But defeating that kind of problem doesn't end the story. It begins a new one. Because once people believe in you, you are no longer free to fail. The next challenge is no longer the giant in front of you. It's everything that comes after. Is that the moment a man has to give up being just a man, to become a myth others can believe? David is not the first king. That role belongs to Saul. But Saul represents something unstable, a kingship still tied to tribes, still fragile, still contested. David changes that.
Saul has slain his thousands, and David his tens of thousands. First book of Samuel 18:7.
This is not a report, it's a transformation. David doesn't just win, he becomes believable, as a leader, as a king. Later traditions place him at the origin of a kingdom, echoed centuries later in the Tel Dan Stele, a memory of a dynasty, rooted in a name. History gives us figures like this, like Napoleon Bonaparte. In 1805, at the Battle of Austerlitz, Napoleon defeats the combined Russian and Austrian armies, one of the most decisive victories in European history. After Austerlitz, he is no longer just a general. He becomes a figure of inevitability. His victories are studied, his image spreads across Europe, his legend grows faster than the facts themselves. Because power is not only what you do, it's what people believe you're capable of doing next. Because leaders don't just rule through force, they rule through belief. So maybe David didn't need Goliath to become king, but without Goliath, would anyone have believed he should be? And if power depends on belief, then what does this story really show us? So, what really happened? A miracle? A duel? Or something else entirely? Maybe David didn't defeat a giant. Maybe he defeated doubt, the fear, the belief in what seems impossible, and the refusal to accept it. From Homer, to Hollywood, to the Bible, we keep telling the same story. The giant, a challenger, a moment that decides everything. But history is rarely that simple. It becomes an image, and that image hides how the victory really works. The hardest challenges are not defeated by strength, but by changing the rules of the game. And once you see it, you start seeing it everywhere. History isn't finished. Stay curious.